as you step into the space of rewriting your story and becoming a soul owner, it's being able to recognize what is bitterness and what's a boundary. It's continuing to take responsibility and be able to say, I want my future to be different.
Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Called Women podcast. I'm your host, Natasha Miller. Today, I have a special guest in the studio with me today. She is an amazing woman of God. She's also a dear friend. Her name is Juliette Dugger. She is a soul care coach. She enjoys creating soul owners. She's the founder of Wild Well Co. and the author of an amazing transformational book called The Watershed Warrior. And she's also the host of a podcast called The Yellow Soul. Juliette, welcome to the Called Women podcast.
Thank you for having me, friend. It is an absolute honor and pleasure to be here with you, and I can't wait to dive into our conversation together. We've had to reschedule this a few times, you know.
We did.
So we made it.
And we were hanging out even before this episode, you know, talking about some deep stuff already. So I know that our conversation today is going to hit the hearts and souls of women all over the world. So I mentioned that you are a soul care coach, and I loved how you share with clients and women that you really do want women to own their souls. So would you mind going into more detail of what made you want to become a soul care coach?
I love that question. So my origin story of that is when I was 17 years old, I started freelancing as a professional makeup artist, and at least I called myself a professional.
I didn't know that.
It would be a few years in, right? And I would hone my skills, and I started putting makeup on my girlfriends when they'd come over to hang out and spend the night. And I remember where I was at the time. We were living out in the country on some land, and we had this little, we called the Wellhouse on our property, and it was just fun. It was just kind of like a little lean-to, had a bathroom in there, you know. There was not a whole lot in there, but it was kind of like this little, I guess it was like the, you know, just little girl space. And so I would go in there and sneak in there, and I was like, hey, let's go put on makeup. And they were like, man, all my friends called me Jew. They would be like, Jew, you're actually really good at this. And I was like, and I like doing it. And so I kept doing it, and I kept doing it. So by the time I reached 17, I was like, you know, I think I'm going to strike out and do some things. So I started doing, you know, some makeup and a little bit of hair, but I really focused on the face. And then I ended up going to Page Park's modeling school in Houston to study commercial print. And that was when I was a senior in high school. And so it just kind of developed from there. And so as that continued, what I discovered is that as women would sit in my chair to get their face done, they started pouring their guts out. And I was like, what's happening? So let me just backtrack a little bit. When I was 13 years old, when I returned home from camp, and I talk about this in my book, Watershed Warrior, is that I share the story about God making it really clear that he had called me to tend to the hearts of women. Now I'm a 13-year-old kid, right? Just getting home from camp. I had this amazing experience, but still, I was like, what does that even mean? And so fast forward as I'm, you know, doing makeup and doing something I love and enjoying the journey, I noticed that I was so drawn, even as a young girl, I was so drawn to before and afters. It didn't matter what it was. It didn't mean it had to be a personal transformation. It could be a remodel on a house, but I was so amazed by the before and the after. And it wasn't long that I realized that these women sitting in my chair, that this was and would be what my life would look like. And that would be, it transferred from the outward canvas to the inward canvas of the soul. And so for me, it was witnessing that transformation, because I realized that through the process of the chair is that them sitting there was, you know, it was helping them feel something different and feel beautiful outwardly and walk away feeling different and loving what I was doing with their makeup. But what I came to discover was that every conversation for me went way past the surface of the skin, and it went into what I call the skin of the soul. And so now fast forward to years later, there's an origin story, Natasha, that God has designed for every single human being. But we're going to highlight females today. So there is a origin story for every female. And when we take ownership of our soul, when we do that, we step into that space with God. If you follow throughout Scripture, God says, for example, put on the garment of praise to lift off the spirit of heaviness. He doesn't say to us, I will put on the garment of praise. He says, no, you put it on. We have this ideology that we're waiting on God and he's waiting on us. He's written us this beautiful book, his manuscript, his words. It says, this is how you live your life. So when we step into that space and we begin to connect the dots of his word to the wounds of our soul, man, our life changes and we begin to discover the origin story, his original intent and design for our lives. And that is a very long answer to your short question.
I love it though.
I could go on, right? So it transitioned. I still love doing makeup. I don't do that anymore. I did that for years. But you know, when it comes to the design of our soul and how we're each uniquely crafted by our maker, we invite him into that space in our lives. He show up for us in ways that are so exceedingly abundantly above and beyond anything that we could ask, think, or imagine. Because he says he's put that power on the inside of us. And so he's there. He's a gentleman. He's like, I'm here. I want you to ask. I want you to seek. I want you to knock. And you keep doing it and you keep showing up.
Yeah.
Right? You stay in his presence because his presence is what gives you perspective. One of my friends says, practice his presence.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we experience God. We experience his love for us. We experience that intimacy. There's not a human being on planet Earth, even our significant other, our spouse, our children, that can do for us what Jesus Christ can do.
Amen. No, that is so true. And it's so sobering to be reminded of that truth, to be reminded of that fact that there's only one who is found worthy, right?
Yes.
Of our untainted devotion, right? He's the one that's found worthy. And hearing you, talk about your experiences with women and your evolution, right? Of discovering, okay, God, you really are calling me to not just focus on the outer appearance, but to be able to hone in on the skin of the soul. That was really, really powerful. And I know as women, we go to the hair salon, right? Or we go get our makeup done. And as you were talking, what word highlighted to me was the power of a chair. Like when you were talking, I saw a chair, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, even for you working with women, what happens? What is the most transformational, powerful moment that you could, share with us? Or even if there's just a thread or a consistency that you see with the women you're working with, when they're sitting in your chair, whether it's sitting in a virtual chair, whether it's sitting across from you, what really takes place when you allow them to take the time to unveil, to peer into the skin of their soul?
Yeah, I love that. There's an unraveling that has to happen. And it's brutal.
Yeah.
Yet the beauty amid that, because God promises us he will grant us beauty for the ash heaps in our lives. And so it's so profound to me, and it never gets old to hear, right? To physically hear, because I do all of my coaching is virtual because I can, I have international clients and I've always done my coaching sessions. How I have structured what I do is it's always a phone call, because I have been in this space with God where I really felt led to learn body language listening. And so it has taught me to show up as a coach and show up as an entrepreneur, prepared, that it's not that I'm not just showing up in this space with another human being that's just haphazard or that I'm not prepared for. And so for me, being able to live that fasted life, and this is my friend, that living a life that is fasted, and what that looks like is just every day that God shows me what sacrifice do I need to make today. And it's created a life of sensitivity for me. Going back to the individual, listening and hearing that transformation when that wound in their life is connected to his truth. When those lies in their lives are connected to the truth of his word, to his presence, to his promise. And Natasha, what happens is that in that moment, what they uncover and discover through rewriting their story, because they have been living a certain narrative up to that.
Yeah.
And so they're stepping into a space so brave and so courageously to say, I want to rewrite my story. I don't know what this is going to cost me. I don't know what it's going to look like. But what happens is that the exchange that transpires when they connect his word to their wounds, and that truth begins to pour in and seep in to the rafters of their soul, and all that residue and all that's been hanging out in the canyons of their soul, that trespassing that has been taking place by the one who fears them most, not made of flesh and blood.
Yeah.
The enemy of their soul. The one that Jesus Christ took the sting of death out, right? The exchange that takes place is intimate belonging. That's the cry of our hearts. When we uncover and discover where the enemy is trespassing in our lives, and our story is rewritten in those places, what God does is he comes in. We've been living, that narrative is an orphan story. There's places in us that are orphaned, that long to have the fathering, long to have that belonging. My oldest, my daughter, she, years ago when she was really young, she said, the truth is, Mom, we all long to belong.
Wow.
We all long to belong.
Yeah.
We pick up agendas. We pick up battles that are not ours. We step into spaces that were never designed for us to be in, because the cry of our heart is intimate belonging. So we will have false lovers. We will bring things into our lives, get into relationships that were never intended for us. We will entertain those. We will maintain those. I could go on.
Right.
We will do that simply for one thing: intimacy.
Yeah.
And we're never satisfied. So we keep reaching, and it's a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
And the desired goal with God is that he's like, come on. You reach the bottom, you have a little thread, let that thread be his garment. You're at the bottom, let that be the moment where you say, I can't do this anymore. And you actually mean it. That's a soul owner. That's a soul owner.
Yeah. How do you, even just in regards to giving the Lord access, to those parts of your life and to those parts of your story, like, because you kept using a key word, the word intimacy, right? Yeah. Intimacy and belonging. So can you go into more detail of how would you define intimacy? Because I think some people can define it through, like something physical with, your spouse.
Yeah.
But the way that I've heard you describe it in multiple conversations and how you describe it in your book is a bit different. So I'd love for you to just talk about, what does intimacy mean?
Yeah.
How would you define it?
When you say that word, I think of being knit together.
Yeah.
I think of that there is no separation, because when I think of intimacy, it's unconditional, agape love. It's love. When the word of God says that God is love, it's not only what he does and what he demonstrates, but it's literally who he is. Love defines every single thing he does. In us, for us, through us, what he makes available to us. The access is love. How do I know that? Because the scripture tells us that it's perfect love that casts out all fear.
That's good.
Love. Love is the pathway. Love, when we embark upon this journey, and to go a little bit deeper into your question of intimacy, just to pin that for a moment, I want to say this. Intimacy can feel like a word that can be extremely challenging for the hearts of women who have endured physical, emotional, sexual abuse, trauma in our stories. That I have had so many clients over the years where when we begin to step into that moment of having that conversation around intimacy, very important for me to learn their story and understand where they're coming from and what their background is. And I've had quite a few women, even in my retreats, that they'll say it almost angers them. And they'll say, I really don't like when you use that word intimacy. And they'll say, it makes me feel dirty. So I immediately know that there is something that has transpired in their story that has caused them to feel that when you say the word intimacy, it equates to someone taking. It's a violation. So being able to navigate those conversations and being very sensitive to that when we talk about intimacy, we're not talking about intimacy in terms of human to human intimacy. This is not intimacy or love where there's strings attached. You're not earning anything. You're not performing. You know, Jesus Christ, when we look at when he rose out of the water and the Father said to him, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." This was before Jesus performed any miracles, fed the 5,000. This was prior to any of that. And what became so deeply translated into my own soul, in my own heart, is that his love for me is not tied to my performance, what I do, what I don't do. My existence, my breath, my face every morning brings him pleasure. You, Natasha, every listener, brings the heart of the Father pleasure. He is our maker. He made us. So being able to step back into our story and rewrite that, it takes so much courage, and God knows that, and he will show up for us. You know, Jesus, it says Jesus endured the cross because of the joy that was set before him. He went through Gethsemane. Gethsemane literally means the oil press, that crushing. He was crushed because he knew on the other side of what that would cost, that was the pathway for our intimacy to be restored.
What do you think causes fear in women to actually walk that journey out? Because I know that there are listeners who are tuning in right now to where they are aware of what they've walked through, the trauma they've experienced, and they want to get free, but they're afraid. They're afraid of what it's going to cost them. They're afraid of what is going to be, like what they're going to have to let go of. And they're just afraid of, I would say, like what's coming to mind to me is they're truly afraid of living free. Because I think a lot of us, we have a desire to live free, to not be burdened down. But when we've been accustomed to living when we've been accustomed to simply existing instead of living, it could really take time to recognize that no, God just doesn't want me to just be here. God wants me to actually get free so that I can begin to live the life that he wants me to live as his daughter.
Yeah. I love this question. I want to speak to women who may not have a history with God.
Yeah.
And women who do.
Mm-hmm.
Because amid my own story of having Jesus Christ in my life and accepting him and saying, Jesus, I want you, when I was 5 years old.
We have a little guest. Okay.
I love it. I love that. That baby's agreeing with me. So
yes, she is. She came out the door. She was like, "Beesh."
Being a follower of Jesus Christ at 5 years of age, and then as that has unfolded in my life, that there's places in my story that I've had women say, I don't know how you can still love the hearts of men, how you can still love the hearts of women. I don't know how you haven't turned away from God. Having a history with God, it's a choice, Natasha, to
That's good.
see his goodness. It is a choice to stay the path. It's a choice to be a soul owner. It is choosing. We can either lean into the narrative that I grew up with hypocrisy, and I grew up with whatever it is, whatever the ingredients have been that have been added to the recipe of our lives, many uninvited, many that we didn't ask for. What do we do with that? And we don't have a history with God, and we don't have that to fall back on. And someone says, well, God's always come through. And someone looks at you and says, well, I didn't grow up in a faith-based environment, or what I did grow up in was extremely dysfunctional. Knowing that it requires trust.
Yeah.
We'll just have faith. We say these things with the assumption that that's just so easy, because we also assume that every person also may have a history with God like we do, or that it's not severely tainted in some way. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at our lives and we step into the space with wanting to discover, God, who are you? And even if we do have a history with God, and there's so many conversations that I've had with women where I'm like, hey, we got to unlearn some things. We got to unlearn and relearn. Let's unpack our souls. What does this actually look like for you? When I say falling in love with Jesus Christ, what does that actually mean? Well, why would I want to? There's these places in my story that God is in the same box. Jesus is in the same box as the hands of human, or those who have hurt me or abused me or betrayed me in some way. And I want to be clear. I'm referring to any relationship in our lives. It could be female to female. Some of the greatest pain in women's lives has come from their bloodline, from grandmothers, mothers, sisters, girlfriends, best friends who, I'm going to be straight up. Like I have people that I've coached that their best friends had an affair with their spouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you reconcile that, Natasha?
Right. That's a lot
Come
to
on.
reconcile. Yeah.
It is making peace with the pieces. Making peace with the pieces. It is, as you step into the space of rewriting your story and becoming a soul owner, it's being able to recognize what is bitterness and what's a boundary.
Man.
it's continuing to take responsibility and be able to say, I want my future to be different.
Yeah.
I want to rewrite my story. I don't know how what happened to me isn't going to be repeated, but I want it to be redeemed. I want this to be different in my marriage or my relationship with my significant other or with my children. I want to be what I didn't have growing up. I want my children to have a different outlook, a different perspective. And being able to, it takes a step.
Yeah.
And I don't want to minimize that or diminish the power in that, but it literally is about deciding.
Yeah, it is.
It is about deciding. It's about you come to the precipice of saying, if I say I want something different and I want to step out of the insanity cycle of repeating the same behavior and staying in that loop over and over, it starts with your yes. It starts with your decision. It starts with that choice. There is a day. Let's talk about this for a minute. Let's talk about the woman at the well. So, Fotini, and I share about this in my book, but I got to talk about this because it really, it speaks.
Yeah. She
had walked to that, what she considered this God-forsaken well. And she was in and out of tumultuous relationships. The man she was living with was not her husband. And there was a day that showed up in her life, whatever garment she had on, whatever she wore to step out of the house, to go walk to that well in the middle of the field. And the well she had to go to is not the well that all the other women went to, because she was considered the outcast of society and dirty. So she couldn't go to the well that was local and convenient and close. No, she had to take a long walk in the hot, scorching sun and knew that she was going to have to turn around with those water jars and come right back into her village. It was a walk of shame. But friend, there was a day that she did the same thing that she had done every other morning, and she had no idea that when she took that walk to the well, there was something waiting for her that was about to completely alter the rest of her existence. Intimacy.
Yeah.
Perfect love was sitting on the edge of a well waiting for her. Jesus Christ. He had his whole team with him.
Right.
And he knew, Jesus knew, and they said, hey, what are we doing here, Jesus? He said, y'all go on ahead and go get you some food. I'm going to go over here and sit on the edge of this well. I have an appointment. I have a woman who needs me, who has tried false lovers. The relationship she's in isn't her spouse. And she doesn't know that what's waiting on her is about to change her life forever. And here she comes, doing what she's always done, walking to the well, and there he is. Jesus Christ crossed boundary lines because she was a Samaritan woman. And someone like him and a man, right? His origin, his ethnicity, and where she came from shouldn't be talking, shouldn't be asking her for a drink of water. And he said something to her, Natasha, that I believe that for our listeners today, this is what he wants to say to the heart of every woman, and it's this. He looked at her and he said, you don't have to look any further. Yeah. He said, I'm the one you've been looking for. Yeah. That's the thread when we feel like we can't hold it on any longer, when we feel like we're at the bottom of the pit, when we feel like we are completely spent, we can't go through another sickness with our kids, with our spouse, We can't have another failed relationship, failed business appointment. We're struggling. We need provision. We want love. We want successful relationships. And we step back and we go, so you're telling me that this one thing could change everything? Yeah.
The answer is yes.
Yes. Yes.
It's yes. And I think too is in a world where things just seem so complicated, and so you have to strive to do this, you have to do this in order to get this X, Y, and Z. It's Jesus. He came with a better way where it's like all you have to do is to look at me, to choose me, to decide to be with me, to walk with me.
Yeah.
And I believe that just what you shared about the Lord, you know, what he said to the woman at the well, and what he's even saying now to everybody is, I am what you have been looking for.
Yes.
And it's the power of choosing, right? We make decisions every day. Some decisions are not the best decisions for us. Some decisions are life-changing decisions, but the best decision that you'll ever make is deciding to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
He is the way out. You know what I'm saying? Not from the place of like, not the way out, but he is the escape. He is that place where you can come and you can hide from the world and you can come and be in his embrace. And he's able to attend to your heart. He's able to help you think about your situation in another way. He's able to give you the confidence that you need to be able to live on for another day and to make decisions that are going to help your life versus, you know, destroy your life. So I love just the consistency of your message, right? With helping women be soul owners, and with your coaching business, the Wild Well Co. I was thinking about even when the woman at the well, and how when you were younger, when you were, I think you said like 17, and you guys would hang around that as well. So I'd love for you to share more about the Wild Well Co. and just even how women can stay in contact with you and to be able to just stay in your circle, right? So that they can see what's happening on the Yellow Soul podcast and what's happening with the Wild Well Co. Because you have some really great things that are in store. I get your emails, so I read them, and I see that you guys have a community that you guys are getting ready to start. But I'd love for you to share more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that invitation. Well, I'll circle a little bit around and then come back directly to your question. You and I became connected through an amazing friend. And then my co-host on the segment of my podcast, Yellow Soul, which is called Ground Table, Britt Alvin, we had you on the podcast, and I would love for your listeners to go listen to that because it's amazing hearing your story and your insight and what you share on that as well. And I think about that community and those relationships, and an essential piece of Wild Well Company is, and we are, what you touched on is we are launching what we're calling the Wellhouse membership, the Wellhouse community. And we're so thrilled about that. And there's a lot to come in that. We're so stoked because one of the things that's going to be incredible is we are going to start meetups in different areas and domestically and hopefully, internationally, and being able to bring women together and have conversations around rewriting their story. And that's an essential piece in creating community. And the tagline, if you will, for Wild Well is free mind and healed body. And so the core piece of being a soul owner and soul care for me as a coach is freedom in the mind, because that's where it starts. And Joyce Meyer, her book that she wrote years ago that is an amazing tool and resource guide called Battlefield of the Mind. And I think about how long ago I heard her say in one of her one of her shares is she said, better start thinking about what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
And she changed my life when she said that, because what we think transforms our lives. And we know it's scriptural because God tells us, right, in a scripture that when we renew our minds, he promises transformation is attached to that. And Natasha, you've said something throughout our conversations today, and that is, hey, Jules, what's the access point?
Yeah.
What's the access point? Because my promise to myself is that when I'm in a conversation with a female, and if it ends up going the direction, it's not just like, hey, how are you? Let's grab coffee. And I can tell that they're hungry and they're hurting and they need something. We all want, hey, what's the elixir?
Right.
Girl, tell me how it's done.
Right? How'd you do it?
Tell me how it's done.
Jesus.
We want that before and after. We're like, this is where I am, and man, I long for something different. And so, to nutshell that, I guess I could say, for a Wildwell, free mind and healed body, because I believe that when the mind is free, the body follows. Yeah. You know, when we earlier talked about the skin of the soul, that we talk about, man, I just want to feel good in my skin. I just want to feel good. I want to look good. I want to feel healthy. What about the skin of our soul? Like we will gravitate towards different ways to cope, and our soul is still like, hey, what about me? What about me? So Wildwell Company, best way to get connected. I have some free resources when women go on my website, which is wildwellcompany.com. And I have a resource guide on there where they can learn about some of those like baseline boundaries to set up.
I have it before we met. I went on Instagram and I went through all your stuff and I was like, oh my God, I love her stuff. So yeah, she has some really cool like free resources to help you. I think because you did one on like boundaries and so definitely check it out.
Yeah, there's boundaries. There's a resource guide there. And there's just some practical, like, we love the, like, those little bullet points, right? Like, break it. Hey, tell me what to do. Like, break it down. And so it's just really inviting women into a space to own their soul and to do whatever it takes. But I want to be so, like, clear about this for the hearts of your listeners today, because it can overwhelm us, and we can keep saying, where do I start? Find a starting point. And I hope that this conversation becomes that for someone today, that this becomes their starting point. It starts with that simple step forward. Let this be your starting point today.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And I agree with Juliette. Today, whenever you're listening, whether you're listening to it 2024 or 2025, it's not too late to start again. It's not too late to begin again. And we promise you that when you make that decision to start again, to pursue God, to start becoming curious about your life, becoming curious about your story, wanting to just really live the life that you know that you're called to live, you will not be, what am I going to say? You will be amazed at what God is going to expose and what he's going to share and invite you into. So, Juliette, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me. It has been such an encouraging time. Whenever I talk with you, I'm always I'm reminded of how much the Lord loves me. And I'm also moved to continue to stay on my journey of growing, to stay on my journey of, discipline. Like you just exude, just this safety for women to come and simply be who they are. And I just want to honor you for that. Thank you for all that you do for women that you coach, all that you do with just women that come across your path. So yes, I'm so grateful you were here. You guys make sure to check the show notes because we're going to have all of the deets of how you can stay in contact with Juliette. And yeah, so we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Yeah. Thank you, friends. Cheers. Thank you, Natasha. What did you think of today's episode? I hope you loved it as much as I did. If you found any value in this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you downloaded this episode by hitting that little down arrow wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have any big takeaways from today's episode, feel free to share it with a friend that you think would benefit from this episode. I absolutely love hearing how you feel about the episodes that I'm sharing and creating for you. So feel free to tag me on social media with any truths or breakthroughs that you have received. I love reading what you find the most value in. Thank you again for being here today, and I pray that you felt the love of God through today's episode. And always remember that you belong in God's story.